Welcome to Girl Talk. My name is Caroline, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. I have with me three guests. I have Caitlin on my right, and I have Farida, and I have Catherine. In this episode today, we are going to speak about how to set healthy boundaries between mothers and daughters. So our first question here today is, what do boundaries mean to you? So Catherine, what do boundaries mean?
Boundaries to me means kind of setting up the space between you and other people, deciding for yourself what is acceptable, what is negotiable, and what is non-negotiable. And I think a lot of times, especially in a Christian atmosphere, we are always talking about like doing everything for everyone at all times. And of course, we want to, show Christ's love and that unconditional love. But at the same time, it's so important to be able to set those boundaries between you and other people to determine what is okay and what is not, because what might be like love for someone is not actually love. It might actually be like needing to separate yourself or distance yourself. And I think boundaries in that sense are important to cultivating like a really healthy relationship, to be able to say like, this is where like I stop and you begin, and this is where I begin and you need to end. And we don't necessarily think about the boundaries that we need to set between us and other people as much as we should.
Okay, Farida, do you have anything else to add to that?
I mean, it kind of goes into probably what we're going to be talking about later, but just communication is like the most important thing in that, because if you're going to set boundaries, you need to make sure that everyone knows the boundaries that you're setting.
Okay.
And that they're communicated and accepted and also like explained well.
Right. That's a very good point about communication. And Catherine, you defined it very well. Caitlin, do you have anything to add about boundaries?
I think boundaries for me is just the permission to say no.
Okay.
And it's the permission to say, I don't want to speak about that. I don't want you involved in this area of my life, and just no. Like, I am not allowing you into this. I am not allowing myself to exceed what I'm capable of doing.
Excellent. Okay. So how do you try to set those boundaries? I think Farida kind of touched on it a little bit. So can you explain that further? How do you try to set those boundaries?
I mean, if I'm ever like talking to someone and I feel like our relationship is kind of in that place where it's not necessarily growing, it's probably because there's some kind of boundary that we're not talking about that needs to be established. And so for me, even though I don't necessarily love confrontation, like I do still do it, and I try to talk with that person, understand their point of view and their perspective and their worldview, especially because a lot of times like you think someone thinks the way that you do when they really don't. And so understanding like their point of view and their worldview, it just helps to set that like mutual communication between those two people.
Okay. And then, so that would take us into a different segue. How would you try to set a boundary between you and your mother?
Hi, Mom, I love you. I mean, I think, actually, Caitlin, why don't you answer this question while I think about it?
So I've done it.
Right.
Mom and I have worked on this a lot, and I think I've needed to set boundaries on an emotional and verbal stance with you. And I think it took years for me to realize I am incapable of handling or incapable of speaking about certain things with you. And I think it took an even longer time for me to be okay with that and to confront you and say, Mom, it hurts me and it really bothers my emotional, health when you talk to me about this and when you say these things to me. And I don't feel equipped yet to kind of take that correctly and to kind of internalize it in a healthy way. So for now, I would appreciate it if we did not speak about this, or if we did not kind of impose on each other certain things. And so I think setting it with your mother is probably the hardest to do, because they raise you, they know you better than your friends know you, and sometimes even when you know yourselves. But I think it comes both ways, whether you are burdening your mother too much and they need to set boundaries with you, or the other way around. It works both ways. But I think boundaries are important for a sustainable relationship and for a relationship that is going to last for the rest of your life in any form, but especially with your mother.
So if you haven't guessed, Caitlin is my younger daughter, And she's right. And I know a lot of mothers were very concerned about this topic when I explained that we will be discussing on CYC that we will be talking about how to set boundaries with mothers and daughters. A lot of mothers gave me pushback and they were terrified. They did not want us to address this topic because they don't want to hurt the relationship between themselves and their daughters. But as Caitlin said, it was very difficult for me in the beginning because she's right. I raised her, I know her well, but it was actually the best thing that happened to our relationship is when she was able to speak to me honestly and openly and say, Mom, I can't handle this right now and I need space because I'm not able to process and I'm not able to carry this and I'm not able to deal with this. And I had to step back and I had to respect that boundary. It does not mean my daughter does not love me. It does not mean my daughter does not respect me. It does not mean that my daughter does not want me part of her life. And that's something that I want parents to understand. When our children tell us we need space or we need time, we have to respect that, especially when they're adults. So I'm not speaking about young children here. I'm not speaking about a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old who tells her mother, I need space from you, and rolls her eyes. I'm speaking about adults. You know, Caitlin is 22 years old, and she has the right to say to me, Mom, we need to set these boundaries until you know how to deal with your emotions and you know how to deal with your issues. And then when the time is right, we can speak. So what do you two think about that, about you and your mothers? How can you communicate that to your mothers as well?
I mean, I know for me, like, my parents have made it clear to me that if there's something that I don't feel comfortable talking about, to just very outright say it and not kind of dance around the words or anything, but just be like, I don't feel like talking about this right now. Can I have some space? And they're so good about just respecting that. And it did take a little bit of time to actually set that boundary, because a lot of times, you know, like, we just say, whatever, never mind, and we just walk away. And my parents really don't like that, and I understand why they wouldn't like it. And so just saying, like, I just need time to think about this and reflect on it before I can even speak about it. And so my parents have been really good about respecting that, and I'm so appreciative of it.
You're very fortunate that your parents were able to respond that way.
Yeah.
How about you, Catherine?
I was going to say that I think, kind of going off of what Caitlin was saying, a lot of times I think moms feel like they almost, correct me if I'm wrong, like have a right to know like what is going on in their daughters' lives all the time. And then daughters oftentimes feel like their mom shouldn't know anything of what's going on in their lives, or their moms feel like they shouldn't know what's going on in their own lives, which I think both views are completely incorrect. And I think that for one thing, daughters need to recognize that like your mom is not here to like, she doesn't have an agenda against you. She's actually your biggest advocate.
Right.
And a lot of times we think that like, because she like tells us no, or like she thinks a certain way about something, that she like hates us or she wants us to be miserable. But at the end of the day, like, who's seen more life out of the two of you?
Right.
And then I think the other thing is that moms also need to recognize the personality of their daughters. Like, I'm assuming between you two, like Caitlin, you know, she likes to have her space. She likes to like do things in her own time and in her own way. And you needed to recognize that in her. Between me and my mom, like, I think I'm pretty open with my mom. But there are some things that like she knows that like if I want to talk about it, I'm gonna have to be the one to bring it up, because like otherwise if she just kind of blindsides me, I'm gonna be kind of standoffish and I'm not gonna be appreciative of the conversation in the moment. And I think over time, like, I'm pretty dramatic, so I think we've like figured that out with me kind of yelling here and there. But it does come down to like that communication and that perception that both people need to develop. Because you know, sometimes parents think that they're doing the right thing and that they're totally understanding their kid, and sometimes parents or kids think that by pushing their parents away, they're like gonna get the space that they need. But instead, it could cause resentment and it can cause a lot of distancing that I don't think either party wants.
Right. I love how Catherine talked about that as mothers, it all stems from love. But we also have to understand what that love is and what the intention of that love is, because sometimes, and I know I can speak for myself, and I'm sure a lot of other mothers make the same mistake, when we start seeing our child withdraw a little bit or become quiet or not communicate, we take it upon ourselves to reach out to other people who are their friends or their friends' mothers and start asking for information, which means we're bringing other people into the problem between us. Or some mothers I know have read their daughters' journals, they have read their daughters' diaries, and to find out, well, what is going on in my child's life. And I did make that mistake one time, and I was wrong. And I will tell every mother that is not the way to try to find out what's going on with your child. It's a mistake that I made that I don't want other mothers to do. And right now we're just going to take a break, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to Girl Talk. We are discussing how to set healthy boundaries between mothers and daughters, and right now Caitlin's going to take over.
Great. I will say this to mothers, and this is something my mother did to me all throughout our lives. And I think my father actually was the one who really cultivated this when my sister and I were growing up. He wanted us to feel comfortable at all times and with anything to come to both of my parents with any mistake I made, any problem I have, any issue I have with them or with other friends, and to feel safe. And knowing that when I did that, I wasn't going to be punished, I wasn't going to be yelled at, I wasn't going to be sent up to my room, because we are adults and we are able to have this conversation together. So having that relationship with my mom growing up was imperative to how I speak to her now and how I relate to her now. I trust her, and I trust her with the information I give her, and I'm okay with her knowing things about my life when I tell them to her. And I think the same goes for you, is you don't feel like you have to snoop, and she doesn't feel like she has to find out from my friends, because she trusts me to tell her what is going on in my life. And I think our boundaries have allowed that, and I've permitted you, and you've permitted me to have a safe space to talk if I have made a mistake, which I have many times. And I have gone to her and I've said, Mom, I feel really awful about it. I did this, and I don't know where to go from here. And instead of me being grounded for 2 weeks or 2 months, she said, you know what? I know that you're struggling, and I know this is really hard for you, so here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to help you forgive yourself. And I think that now, growing up, our friendship has developed so much, and this friendship has actually been my grounding for other friendships that have fallen apart. And I think I always had somewhere to go to for a friend. And I think the same for you, is that you've always been able to come to me in every way. And I think that was something that is huge. But I also think when we grew up, that friendship became more of a friendship than a mother-daughter relationship. And that is where I felt more burdened, because sometimes when I needed my mom, you just needed a friend, and there was a miscommunication in that. And so you were talking to me about things that I couldn't handle at the time, but I also wasn't telling you I needed a mother, not a friend. So I think communicating what you need through different phases of your life and different stages and different issues is how boundaries are created, and also how healthy relationships are maintained. But
that's an excellent point that Caitlin makes. I think we as mothers, as our daughters begin to grow up, we think of them as friends. But our daughters are not able to handle the issues that we're going through. And Caitlin makes a very valid point. We need to define our roles. I'm her mother, no matter what, and she is my daughter. She can come to me with her problems, but I was not supposed to go to her and unload on her my problems, because she could not handle them. And I had to understand that. And we learned that throughout our relationships. As our relationship began to develop when she was younger, and she started to set those boundaries, because she was being counseled by very good people. You know, Caitlin did not just come out of nowhere and say, I need to set boundaries. She was being counseled by people who cared about our relationship, and I appreciated that. But as mothers, we're too proud to take advice from other people sometimes, and we need to humble ourselves, and we need to be okay with someone else coming in who cares about us, and be willing to learn and be willing to counsel in that regard. So I'm glad that Caitlin touched on that. When did you feel that you needed to set boundaries with your mother? Because obviously as a child, you know, your mother's everything to you. So at what age did you start to feel, I need space from my mom?
I think most kids who are starting to go through puberty think that they need that space, and you immediately start to see that distancing and that like, oh, I need to like push her away. But I think it goes to an extreme, and I probably did that when I was like in 13, 14, whatever. And then I think I hit high school and I started to go through things and I started to try to shoulder things that looking back, I wasn't really like capable of handling. And it wasn't until like I opened up to my mom about it that I finally was able to feel like some peace about it. And she was able, like, even though she didn't necessarily know what to do, I felt comforted, and then she like helped me figure out a game plan. And then I think going into college, there's inherently going to be like more of like a boundary setting between you guys, just because you're on kind of different wavelengths. You're in a new stage of your life. You're older. You're a little bit more mature. And I think there were some things that, you know, I brought up to my mom, but I also knew that there were some things that I just kind of had to process and keep for myself and just kind of figure it out and like receive advice from a priest instead. And because some things I just knew that what she was going to say, and some things I just didn't think that she would necessarily be able to help me with. And that's not that I don't think that she's capable, but it's just something that I had to learn and figure out on my own. And I think that going into adulthood, that's like the best, like maybe 18-ish. I mean, it's hard to give an age because maturity does not necessarily correlate with chronological age. But I think it's important to recognize where you start to feel like you're able to think maturely and think thoroughly through your own issues, and starting to recognize where your mom and where your parents can start to come into play and where you need to figure things out on your own.
What about you, Farida? When did you feel like you needed to set boundaries? Because Farida's still a senior in high school. She's not in college yet.
Yeah, I think I'm still at like that age where I'm still trying to figure it out. I mean, I'm still like 16, and so for me, I know sophomore year was like a hard year for me, and I think maybe that's probably when it started to happen, and I think it's still in that process. But like then I don't know, I had like that 2-week period maybe where I just go up to my room, shut the door, and not talk to anyone the entire day. And even my parents would be like, "Are you okay?" And I'll be like, "I don't want to talk about it, like please go away." And they were like, "Okay, but should we be worried?" And so I think that question for me was like, we're going to give you that space, but we need to know one thing before we do that. And so I think that really helped me start setting that boundary and start understanding where they're coming from and how much it's out of love, and it's not out of like trying to find out what's going on. They just want to make sure that I'm okay. And so for me, I think that's when I started to build that boundary, and it's still very much in the process, and I'm still trying to understand how much they want to know about my life, and it's kind of complicated, but I'm like still learning. And so I hope that by the time I get into college, and like I hope that it like grows more and flourishes.
Okay, that's
Everything
great.
changes in college for the better, I think.
For the better, yes, it
everything,
does.
because everyone matures more.
Right.
It's really great.
Right.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on CYC Girl Talk. Today we talked about how to set healthy boundaries between mothers and daughters. And as you just heard, these girls came up with great ideas and suggestions, and we hope that you moms out there can apply that in your relationship. When your child is setting a boundary with you, it does not mean they don't love you. They love you it's because they love you. So be okay with that. Make it safe for them. And we pray for you as you pray for us. Thank you for joining us.